No, I already pressed record, but can you do the wine glass thing one more time? Thank you, Steve. Hello! Hello! Good evening! I am so glad that you're here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm Christine Gentry. I'm the founder and director of this mysterious organization that put on tonight's event called Feel Represented. I am going to give you the origin story in just a sec. I want to talk about you for a second. So you are here because you are an engaged citizen, which is my favorite kind of human being. You care about what's happening in your local area, and otherwise you are here in June, a year before an election, because you care. So first of all, let's just thank you. Thank you. I assume you are also here because you are concerned about Ken Calvert. Can I get an amen? You would like someone else to be representing us in our district. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. So tonight's objective is to get to know some of the people who are interested in representing you and going up against Ken Calvert in next year's election. Ultimately, my goal is to nominate someone, to endorse someone in that race, and to help them prepare for the primary, which these are important dates. March 3rd of next year is the primary, much earlier than it usually is in California. So if you were not already aware, please know now that the primary is very early so that we can take part in Super Tuesday. So March 3rd is our primary, and it is a jungle primary because we are in California. So the top two candidates will move forward to the general regardless of party. I think we can go ahead and assume that Ken Calvert's going to be one of those spots. So really the other candidates are interested in that second spot. So we're here to meet some of those folks. And I have survey links all over the room because I'm so interested in your opinion. I want to know what you think about who Feel Represented should back. And I want really any feedback you have for me at all. I have a spirit of continuous improvement, and I really want to hear what you have to say. A little bit about me, because a lot of people have been asking rightfully, like, who's this lady? I like to consider myself on the list of good things to come out of Texas. And my family is like straight out of Central Casting, Texas, like dad's Air Force Vietnam vet, right? Mom's housewife. My congressional district when I was growing up is very similar to this one in kind of both demographics, like racially and socioeconomically, but also politically, right? Generally a conservative district because we were in a suburb of Dallas. But of course I'm speaking as if I had any idea what the congressional district that I grew up in was like when I was growing up, and I didn't, right? Not getting involved in any kind of local politics, not voting in local elections, not even knowing our congressperson's name, right? And that's what life was like for me for decades. And then I became a teacher, an urban public school teacher, teaching high school English in Boston and New York City. And I learned so much about how comfortable and privileged I really was, right? Because when you don't vote, when you're not involved in politics, it's usually because life is pretty good for you, right? Life is pretty good for you. Like, you don't need to worry about who's representing you because you're not being discriminated against, or the laws that are passed do not make you uncomfortable or unsafe. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of the laws that had been in place were making my students uncomfortable and unsafe. And I started to feel very involved, and I started to get very active. So this was in the early 2000s. And then in 2016, obviously, right? 2016 happened. And regardless of how you feel about Donald Trump, I think it was a referendum about where we were as a country. And because I'm a public educator, when Betsy DeVos became our Secretary of Education, that was really the turning point for me, that my activism was going to become more than just voting more often, more than just being more informed. I wanted to actually do something, right? Regardless of how successful it was, I wanted to do something and to say that I had done something. And so in 2018, leading up to 2018, I helped a neighbor run for city council. It was unsuccessful, unfortunately, but I also helped with Ayanna Presley's campaign, which was successful. She's a congressperson now representing Boston. And then I moved, right? Last summer, I moved here to Southern California, And it was to launch and direct a teacher residency program for NYU, so that's the work that I'm doing here. But one of the first things I did when I landed, because I cared so much about this now, is to find out who my congressperson was. And I was so upset. I was so upset to find out that this person, who was doing so little for the district and had been doing so little for so long, was representing me in Congress. And I got real fired up about it. And then of course he won again in 2018. And I decided I needed to do something more tangible. I'm new here, right? So what do I do? So I reached out to my friends, Indiana Presley's campaign, and also several other campaigns that I'm not going to name drop for you, but I have awesome friends in the Northeast who are very experienced in successful political campaigns, and I reached out to them. I'm like, what can we do to unseat this man, right? And I got a lot of really awesome advice, and over the months I built a strategic plan that was to nominate someone who could unseat Ken Calvert, by convincing the majority of this district to vote for them, right? And the majority of this district is not Democratic. So we're going to need to nominate someone who can sway the conservative votes in our district. And so that became my strategic plan, and I went out to find some awesome people who could do that. So Feel Represented became the organization that I launched. It's very small. I'm not gonna pretend like this is a big deal, right? I've been working on it for about 8 months. It's a political organization, so a political action committee. It has raised an amount that's significant to me, but is not significant in the long run of politics. And the plan is to support someone with that small amount of money, with that humble gift, and also with my expertise and knowledge and time and energy. So that's what I'm doing in this forum, honestly, is so that I can, this forum is to help me make that decision. That's what tonight is about. So Feel Represented's mission is to ensure that the California's 42nd Congressional District is represented by someone who reflects its residents' values and listens to their concerns. I'm sorry I'm leaning so far forward because that's so important and it's not at all happening. So the first step of the strategic plan was to find out what the district actually wants and needs, right? So I am lucky, again, enough to know some awesome professional folks, and I have a data analyst who's working with me, who's professional, and he did these mock polls that were amazing of our district, because you might know that polling is actually very expensive to run an actual poll of the district. And he used the voter registration and polling and voter history data, and then publicly available census and polling data, and this magical math that I can't pretend to understand. It's called multi-level regression and post-stratification. And he basically ran a poll for me and told me like how people in the district would answer these questions. And while I can't pretend to understand the details of his math, the results of the poll were not surprising at all to me, being where I'm from and knowing the demographics of the district. So the top 4 issues in our district will probably not surprise you either. Immigration, healthcare, the economy, which includes taxes, and guns. These are our top 4 issues in the district. And Feel Represented also had a survey going on the website. Again, we're a humble organization, so our in was not very high, but the overlap there was also surprising. So the Feel Represented survey, I asked on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all concerned and 5 being very concerned, how would you rate the following issues? And the top 3 were healthcare, guns, and the economy, right? So even though my website survey probably skewed toward Democrats, just like this room probably skews toward Democrats because that's who passed around the information, there's amazing overlap in what Democrats care about and what Republicans care about, even though they have pretty different ideas about how to fix the problems, right? So I really want to narrow in on those 4 issues in my part of the Q&A tonight, because that's what my data has shown is important to the district, and I want to nominate someone who can flip this district. Okay? Not necessarily, I don't even care about flipping, I care about unseating Ken Calvert, right? And so I'm going to ask these lovely candidates who will introduce themselves to you in just a second. I'm going to ask them questions about those 4 issues. And we'll talk for maybe 30 minutes, and then I will step back and open the room to your questions. I want you to ask questions, please. Do you want to ask a logistical question now, Jorge? Go ahead.
I was just wondering, was Julia Peacock invited to this?
She was invited. She declined, which was disappointing, but I understand. Okay. Good question. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Time for questions now.
If you want to ask me a logistical question now, you are welcome to. Questions for the candidates, I'm going to ask you to hold on.
Logistical question.
Okay.
What is your endorsement process going to be?
Yeah, so we're small, right? So my endorsement process will be me announcing that I'm endorsing this person and giving them money.
Okay.
That's it. And then I'll join forces with their team, right? If they want my help, I'll join forces with their team.
Okay.
And that's all it is.
On this polling that you cited,
The mock polls.
the mock polls, did that include Republicans?
Yeah. So he
So those
basically
issues are
Yes.
their issues as well.
So he basically used math magic to do a poll for me for free. So polls cost so much money. And it's obviously not a true poll because he didn't actually do it, but he used that publicly available data and then publicly available polling data and overlaid them, right, with the voter history and voter registration data and also census data, and was able to, using math, predict how our district would answer the same questions.
Well, that's encouraging.
It's awesome, totally awesome. Now, what's important to recognize is that a Democrat and a Republican might have very different ideas about how to address those 4 issues, right? But the idea is that we have identified these hot 4, right? We've identified these hot 4. And so if those are the hot 4, then those are the things that all candidates should really be focused on when talking to voters, right? So tonight we're gonna hear what their stances are and what, if any, policy proposals they have on those 4 issues.
Who funded your PAC?
Yeah, so that is FEC available data. I encourage you to look it up. The only person who gave me more than $200 was my friend Erica Brown. The average donation was $27.62.
What's the PAC's name?
Feel represented.
Field representative, okay.
Yes. Great question, because you should care about where money comes from. You should. But let's not pretend that my PAC is going to make a huge difference. The amount of money that we're going to have to raise to flip this district is probably $1 million, right? My little PAC is a blip. So it's symbolic, really, is what I hope. That my support is symbolic, and also that I can transition what I know and my experiences and my connections to a campaign. Great questions, all of them. Thank you. Okay, so you will have a chance to ask the candidates your questions right after I'm done talking to them. Yeah, and we're doing well on time. Okay, are you guys ready for me to switch? Okay. First, I would love for them to stand and introduce themselves to you, these 2 people who have joined us tonight. Can we give them a round of applause?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight on a lovely June. I think it's, what are we, 2nd or 3rd day of summer. It seems like it's not really summer yet because we're getting all this June gloom, which I'm not happy about. So, I'm Regina Marston, and I decided to run for Congress. I actually toyed with it in 2018, but I had a couple of hurricane issues that I had to deal with back in Florida, so I couldn't do hurricanes in a campaign. It just wasn't going to work for me. So basically, I'm running for this position because I had several conversations with the Calvert administration, and they weren't that positive, actually. They were really bad. I've never been hung up on by a representative staff, and I got so angry to the point that I thought I was going to have like a coronary. Seriously, I was so angry. I tried to get meetings, I tried to do all kinds of things, and I usually, not to be like I'm all that, but I usually get people to talk to me. I know how to do that. I couldn't do that. So I joined Invisible 42. We couldn't do that. I marched with people when he showed up at other events. It didn't matter. So I came to the point where I've got to stop being angry at him and run against him. So that's the bottom line. That's why I'm here. And my campaign is really about what matters to you. So my hashtag is California 42 Matters, and my website is reginamarston.com. I have a 5-question survey that is also not scientific polling, but it will help me understand what you all all care about. And it's live right now, so reginamarson.com. You can go take the 5-question survey, and there's going to be a new survey every time, probably every week or so, because I want to gather a lot of information, because I have felt like I didn't matter in this district for the last 14 years I've lived here, and I'm really tired of it. So I matter, you matter, California 42 matters. This is the area of California that has the most growth potential, and we have to galvanize our resources, state, local, and federal. So that's me. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Jean. This is Liam O'Mara.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Liam O'Mara. I am a historian by profession. I teach Middle East history at a few universities in Southern California. And I have been following politics for my entire life. And I've generally tried to be as involved as I can in different places, but had never really thought that I could make it in politics directly, especially since I don't much look like a politician. But I think we're changing a bit in terms of our appreciation of things like that in this country, and have been for some time, so I'm hoping to see if that's really true. Now, what drives me into politics, the sort of things that get me interested in doing this in the first place, I mean, there are two big things that I want to see in Congress in general. I want to see some kind of integrity and honesty. I want to see that the person actually deserves to be there because they care, right? And I want to see some kind of vision, some kind of understanding of what the issues are, right? So I'll just talk about those for just a second. So first off, in terms of the integrity part, right? Knowing that someone in government is actually listening to you matters a great deal to me, right? Christine pointed to Ken Calvert and his singular lack of town halls or responsiveness to constituents. This profoundly offends me, but it's actually not terribly uncommon in this country. A lot of people get into politics as a kind of vanity project. They're there to get rich and, feel that they're powerful or important or something, and they're not there to do the people's business, right? I want someone who's going to listen, someone who's going to respond, someone who's going to actually talk to the constituents, and someone who isn't going to flow wherever they need to go based upon how much money somebody gives them, and actually has some kind of principles for integrity. The other thing is that a lot of people who get into government at all, who get into Congress, have no idea what they're talking about on any given issue, right? They honestly, many of them, Ken Calvert being one of them too, often don't even care, right? They're not interested in what the issues are or how they work. They're just interested in how the party wants them to vote, how a donor wants them to vote, or this or that, and they just aren't interested in looking at what are the problems in this country and what are the solutions that would actually address them, right? So what I'm hoping to do in getting involved in politics at all is to kind of like push that conversation, get people talking, and try to restore a little bit of dignity, right, to our government. So
Yeah, thank you, Liam. Make it a little difficult to see us while we're seated, but I thought this panel style would work for the field represented Q&A, and then the candidates are welcome, obviously, to stand when they answer your questions. That's okay. So feel free to move if you're having trouble seeing. So here's how it's going to work. I'm going to ask both candidates to answer questions about those hot four, right? Those hot four issues. And I'm going to push them. I'm going to play devil's advocate. I'm going to push them from both sides of the aisle, right? So I'm going to, at certain points, I'll pretend to be a conservative person, and at certain points, I'll pretend to be a really liberal person, because you really need a 360 view of how they feel about these four issues and what policy stances they have on how we can address these concerns that the district so clearly has about these four issues. So I used a randomizer app on my phone. Regina is going to answer the first question, but then we will roll really casually. Both candidates are okay with it being more of a conversation. So. The first question I have for you, Regina, is how would you respond to a voter who was worried about immigration from the left? So specifically about conditions in the detention centers right now.
Wow, Christine, that is a good question, because I have spent several days trying to figure out how to get supplies down there, how to I've donated to races, I've donated to several organizations. And first and foremost, I think we have to understand we don't have an immigration crisis, we have a humanitarian crisis. And the humanitarian crisis has been created due to climate change in Central America. And as a sustainability expert who's been working on climate change, especially how it affects California for the last 10 years, we have to do something to galvanize the resources in our country to help these people figure out how to feed themselves, clothe themselves, and create a new economy. So I think in the short term, we have to galvanize our resources to support the organizations that are down there, all of the legal aid societies, all of the people that are going down and investigating. Unfortunately, if this continues and they move into the situation where they're going to create a military detention centers, they're going to stop us from getting in at all to see what's going on. So what I would advise people to do who are concerned from the left, so to speak, and I'm not big on left and right labels, but we'll use that.
That's fair. No, we don't have to. That's fair.
I would advise us all to look at the organizations that are really on the ground down there, make donations. I know that Temecula Valley Club brought donations to the KIND project, which I wasn't able to be there, but I'm hoping to make a donation of money online and to really stay abreast of what's happening. And I know it's not going to do you any good, but call Calvert. They're on my phone. Every single rep is on my phone, and I call them. I just heckle them. I call them. I know they don't really care, but at the end of the day, they do need to understand that we are concerned, and they need to listen to us. So, and research on how this happened to this region, because it's very intricate and it does have a lot to do with the change in the climate. We have to address the fact that they can't grow food, and that is a fact. So that's my answer.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And I actually really appreciate her pushing me too. I love being pushed, so I'll try to avoid that kind of thing. Would you like to answer the same question?
Sure.
Yeah, I'm also going to ask you guys to respond to traditionally conservative concerns about immigration as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense actually to approach it from different sides. And as much as I tend to dislike personal labels and that sort of thing, I understand like that there are various approaches to these problems. We should be able to be understanding of those different perspectives. So let's see. I'll start by saying that the immigration system we have actually is broken, right? It's not, there's nothing new about this. It's been broken for a very long time. And it's broken actually because of a distinct series of policy changes that were made, and we have to recognize those changes in order to see how we got to this broken system. I mean, the fact that we are deporting vast numbers of people all the time, this is extraordinarily expensive. It's a waste of taxpayer money to be doing so in the first place. So how did we get so many people in the first place? That's worth noting here. But just think again, this is not a new problem. Yes, we should talk about, okay, so under Trump, we have basically these sort of virtual concentration camps, right? Locking in tons of people here, many of which actually, since it's not technically a crime under US law to overstay a visa, are not criminals at all. Others committed a misdemeanor, and they're being locked up in poor conditions. That's not only inhumane, but a waste of taxpayer money. Right? On top of that, we spend money on these ICE raids, going door to door and trying to find people and breaking up families, and clearly that's going to offend anyone with the slightest bit of empathy, that you're going to deport someone's mother or someone's father, the family loses a breadwinner, then they're going to fall farther into poverty. Obviously there are social consequences of that. But Trump's policies, while they are, quantifiably worse, right? Before him, Obama was the deporter-in-chief. Before Obama, W was the deporter-in-chief. We have been kicking large numbers of people out of this country for quite some time. So to me, I would start and tell a liberal audience, how did we get here in the first place and how do we change these policies? Right? So if I've got just a second to point to that, I'd note that one of the biggest issues we ran into in the first place was this whole idea of trying to police the border in an almost military way. Because there have always been seasonal flows of workers across those borders that fulfilled a particular economic need. And they tended not to stay in the country. They moved right back out, right? As soon as we started policing that, people were trapped because it became too dangerous to go back and forth, so they stayed and put down roots, right? We can see data tracking across a century of movement, and it only starts spiking. Right? In the last couple of decades here, we started policing that border, and now you're stuck with millions of people in the country. All right, it's a relatively recent problem, and from my perspective, and I would tell liberals, this is a manufactured problem, and we need to address it as such and try to tackle the policies that created it in the first place.
Okay, so I'm going to pretend to be somebody who's on the conservative end of the spectrum, and I don't like people coming into the country illegally. I don't like them potentially taking my jobs. I don't like them potentially taking system help that I helped fund with my tax money. And there's only more of them. There's only more of them coming across the border every day. So what are you, as candidates, going to do about that? Radina.
Well, once again, I mean, a lot of that is somewhat inaccurate information. The immigrants are not necessarily taking any jobs that people in this room would want, for sure. And a lot of the people, they have that's kind of a fallback position, but understandably, the first thing is, and Ken Calvert did do this, he helped us with E-Verify. So I think fundamentally what we really have is, and I've said this many times, my husband will say this, we have a labor issue within our country, and the labor issue has been solved in many ways for a variety of jobs that people don't want to do by immigrants, and many of them illegal. And unfortunately, the employers are really the ones who have allowed this to proliferate because they have not done a good job of using the E-Verify system, and some have ignored it completely. And I speak from experience on this because I've been in the home building industry for over 30 years. And I can tell you right now that the reason that our houses are going so much more expensive than they were 20 years ago is because the labor shortage is killing them. They cannot find the people to do the basic labor for building the homes. And so the people that they're hiring, it's costing them 30 to 50% more. So that's being passed on. So it's fundamentally our immigration problem, especially for our legal immigrants. It comes down to a labor problem for our companies who have become dependent on these workers that are doing the jobs that they cannot afford to hire other people and make a profit. So you have to think about how can we reconstruct our labor, and we have to look at trade schools. Many people do not want their children to go become electricians or plumbers or brick masons or any of the things that we need to keep our infrastructure of our country going. And as long as we have that attitude about, well, my kid's not going to do that, that job has to go somewhere because the company has to have it done. And enter an immigrant or an illegal immigrant and they will take that job and the company will look the other way. So fundamentally, from a business perspective, as all conservatives like to think about themselves as being business people first, we have to address that. We have to look across our education system and how we're training our young people to take different kinds of jobs. Not everybody should be going to college. Not everybody should be, aspiring to be Dr. O'Mara. Everybody is, we need all kinds of laborers, all kinds of workers, and fundamentally that is a policy that we need to create in our country to get us back into that labor flow.
Can I ask you, just for the folks in the room who might not know E-Verify, can you quickly?
So E-Verify is an electronic system that people they get their credentials, their social security number, and all of their credentials to get a job. So when you go get a job, I'm sure you've all had to do this, you have to show them either your passport, your driver's license, your birth certificate, or your social security number, and then they are supposed to E-Verify you to make sure you haven't stolen any of that information. And let's be clear, the black market is selling social security card numbers willy-nilly. I mean, there's a black market on the internet that if you wanted to disappear and get a new social security number and anything else, you can do that. So we have a problem there too, don't we? That could easily be shut down, but the government is not doing that because we have a labor problem. So we have to all recognize that. We've got to start at the problem. And my whole career has been listen, learn and act. You've got to listen to what's going on, learn how people are reacting, and then you have to take action. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. So specifically, the policy suggestion is to enforce the E-Verify law.
Enforce E-Verify and start looking at how we can create a labor pool
Okay.
that is not, that is missing. It's
Okay.
missing terribly here.
Okay, so I'm looking at the clock. I'm gonna ask Liam to respond to the same kind of question, and then I'll probably change the format so that we can move a little more quickly through the other 3 issues. So how would you, if that's okay, just I don't want to steal the audience's Q&A time. So how would you respond to concerns similar to the mock one that I just pretended to have?
Okay, so first off, I suppose it depends on what you mean by the conservative perspective that we're throwing out there, because there are various reasons to be upset by the immigration issue. If you're dealing with somebody from the nationalist or nativist camp there's not a lot that you can really do with that. So I would kind of set that one aside and focus much more on the economic conservatives, because I think there's a lot of ways that you can actually get solid messaging and address things in terms of the data here. Now, there's extensive studies here in the basic literature on migration that immigrants do not take jobs from people, and they do not hurt the economy or lower wages. They actually increase the size of the economy, and they can actually lead to increases in wages overall, because the economy itself is growing. You're putting more consumers on the ground in those areas, right? From a right-wing perspective, immigration can be shown to be consistently a boon to the country that takes in people. And so I think one good way to do that is just to show how that has worked over time. Right, and show the basic right-wing arguments for immigration. Because really, if you have free movement of capital and goods, but you restrict labor, you're actually harming the individual economy there. The two have to go, they have to go together. So there's a basic capitalist logic that goes with this. So, from people on the right who often think of themselves as good capitalists, then you approach it that way. That the movement of labor to suit the economy actually makes sense. A lot of our problems come from attempting to artificially restrict the number of people who come into the country. It's not like we have like a very high population density in this country. It's extremely low by European standards. It's not like we're short of room for people and room for the economy to grow. All right? When we try to think of like migration into the United States, which has been happening for more than a couple of centuries, is basically a river of people, right? Flowing in, sometimes a little bit flowing out, but basically flowing along there. If you put artificial barriers in there, right, trying to restrict that flow, then the water just spills over the side. That's your undocumented population, because they're coming here because there are jobs. If there weren't jobs, they wouldn't be coming here at all. Right? So recognizing that number, changing the total numbers that are able to come in legally, right? So you can take this whole legal or illegal issue aside completely, and then implementing, I think, a proper guest worker system, right? Earlier attempts at this have been kind of like problematic, but we set it up such that people can come in on a temporary work visa here, and they have all the same guaranteed rights as a permanent resident, but it's for a set amount of time. So they can't be exploited the way the undocumented are. They can have a job, they work legally on their job. If they want to go back later, they can go back, where they can extend to apply for extended or apply for permanent resident status, but basically set up a guest worker system that suits the needs of the economy. So again, for that, I would approach it from a capitalist perspective.
Got it. So your policy proposal then is to increase the number of people who can come here legally.
Yeah, widen the number of people who can come in legally and create a proper guest worker system here that actually suits the needs of the economy. So if you're trying to message this in terms of a right-wing audience, then approach it through the capitalist logic.
Okay, thank you. So if you have immigration questions, please feel free to ask the candidates during the audience Q&A, but I'm going to move on to the second hot issue, if that's okay. So the second hot issue is healthcare. And there was overlap with both the mock poll and the field represented website survey on people caring so much about healthcare. So I'm wondering, let's start with Liam this time. I'm wondering how you would respond to a voter who's worried about this issue. Either, because let's play around, you can respond however you want, either because they believe that, for example, Medicare for all should be the approach, because I think all the voters are worried about this because they understand it's broken, right? So let's play around. I'm concerned, and you can pick whichever person you'd like to respond to. I either want you to make sure everyone has health insurance and the government should be doing it, Medicare for all, or the government does a terrible job when they take over institutions. I don't think Medicare for all is great. and people should be able to buy whatever kind of healthcare they want in the private market. So you can choose whoever you'd like to talk to.
Well, I would address it in a fairly data-driven way.
Okay.
So, obviously, yes, the healthcare system is broken. We have declining lifespans. We have actually terrible provision of healthcare. We're ranking below the entire developed world, right? We do not have a healthy population. The key for me here is trying to explain to people through the data how this might actually work. The current system here clearly does not get good results for the amount of money that goes in. We pay twice as much as any other developed country, and we get demonstrably worse results for it. The Medicare system is not socialized medicine. It's not a government takeover and somehow government running something here, because realistically, private providers would still do all of the work. And there's tons of models like that. The German and Dutch systems are completely private. All right? So you don't have to have something like the National Health Service and running hospitals here. Everything can be, individual providers here. What you're doing is you're taking out the middlemen who don't actually provide any value. And you're taking a profit-driven middleman out, and you're putting a non-profit one in its place. This actually increases economies of scale, which can lower costs for providers here because you can better negotiate. It also takes out a lot of the wasteful administrative costs that providers have to deal with, because they're stuck juggling a bazillion different plans, and that means they have to have a whole bunch of people, like working in the bean counter offices to keep track of this stuff. If you just know everyone is covered, it's done. You walk in, oh, you're covered, done. Right? No issues at all. So their costs go down. If their costs go down, our costs go down. The Medicare system simply is the cheaper way to go. Looking at the current plans here and how they would be paid for. My direct taxes might go up $1,200. I will save more than $8,000 a year. That's a simple mathematical issue.
Premium, you mean? Your premium
the premiums and copays, that's basic arithmetic. Anybody understands basic arithmetic. And that's true for people who get their insurance from their employers, because it's part of a compensation package. If you tell someone that my policy will put $5,000 to $15,000 in your wallet, that's your money that you earned, you've got the argument there. So I'd approach it that way. And on top of that too, especially for people who had the other side of that, I'd point out that the ACA system is fundamentally broken and was going to stay broken for two basic reasons. One, in the negotiations, they dropped the public option, which would have provided a competitive pressure, which would have lowered prices on the markets in the first place, right? When that was taken out, prices were able to rise under the ACA system. Two, the mandate system was opposed by conservatives all across the country. As soon as they opposed it, the system was completely doomed. With both of those in place, it cannot be saved. Costs will keep rising under the current system, and there's nothing that will stop them right now.
Okay, thank you. So your proposal is
Medicare for all.
Move away from the ACA, which is Obamacare.
Exactly, yeah. Drop the ACA and actually
toward
go to
Medicare for all.
And I would message it on basic economic terms.
Okay.
That it's going to save you a tremendous amount of money, as well as leaving you the freedom to go wherever you want for your doctors.
Okay, thank you. Regina, you heard how concerned I am. How would you respond?
That. Well, after spending about 4.5 years working for Blue Cross Blue Shield, I applaud your dexterity there, Liam, but that's not going to happen. So I would protect the ACA in the short term, because we have the health insurance industry is one of the strongest lobbyist groups behind the NRA, behind the defense industry. And if anybody thinks they're going to go quietly into the night, I've got some land in Florida that I can sell you really quick, because it's not going to happen. So as a pragmatist, I would absolutely shore up the ACA. And I agree with you in many areas, Liam, that the ACA did not do everything it could. It did not guarantee the public option so that we could lower the costs across the board. But at the end of the day, this is a huge movement. This is a huge shift from what we have traditionally had in this country. Blue Cross Blue Shield started out as a teacher-funded insurance company, okay? So it was all the teachers in California that wanted to pool their money to try to help save their fellow teachers. So the premise behind insurance is the greater the pool, the less the risk that the insurance company has. So I would not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Medicare for All has some potential in the longer term, but part of the reason we're probably not able to do that either, because I sat in on many actuarial meetings at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Maryland, and it was very difficult because they literally tell you who's going to die when, who's got what illness, how much money that they're going to take to keep them alive, and that's how the rates for the insurance, your insurance premiums are determined. So you're just a number, you're a piece of data. They know everything about you every time you go to the doctor. And at the end of the day, the baby boomer generation, and I'm one of them, is aging. So in order for us to mitigate that huge risk pool that's getting ready to hit our country at rapid pace, we have to do something more. We have to have a slower process for us to get out of where we are in order to provide Medicare for all. So eventually that would be a great end state, right? That would be a great end state, but we're probably 8 to 10 years from even really being able to look at that and make it work. And that is with a lot of hand holding and teeth gnashing with Humana and Kaiser and Blue Cross Blue Shield and all of the other people who really like their corporate jets. Okay, they really like to travel, and those are the facts, guys. Those are the facts. We have to mitigate these things with these people, and they are not going to go quietly into the night. So,
Okay, thank you. Again, if you have healthcare questions, please save them, throw them at the candidates during the audience Q&A. But I'd like to move on to hot issue number 3, which is the economy/taxes. So, Virginia, you'll start this time. I'm a very concerned voter. I'm very concerned about the economy, and I'm very concerned about my taxes. I am either concerned because I feel that I'm taxed way too much and I have nothing to show for it, right? Or you take my tax money and you give it to people who are lazy, they don't pull their weight, right? Like I'm paying for them and I worked hard and I have a family, and stop taxing me and wasting my money. Or I'm concerned because there are a lot of people slipping through the cracks, right? Like I pay tax money, but I don't know where it goes because I see a lot of people who can't feed their families. There's a huge and growing gap between the 1%, right, and the people who are working just to feed themselves. How are you going to fix it?
wow, Christine, that's a
Pick your
tough
person.
one.
Pick your
I'm
person.
going to be the one that cares about people, just because I actually do. So my response on that is, and I've done a lot of teeth gnashing over this, and I mean, obviously over the last 50 years, we have had massive wealth, and a lot of the people in the baby boomer generation was able to do that very easily with the tech industry and just all of the growth through technology. A lot of that happened here in California, and so at the end of the day, what we really have are companies that really have used every loophole known to mankind to avoid paying taxes, and then you have the uber wealthy who also use the same loopholes. So we have to reform the tax system completely. I mean, at the end of the day, the tax overhaul that just happened for the uber wealthy and the corporate folks, it's going to end up putting us into such a huge budget deficit and debt that, I mean, I don't even know how long it's going to take us all to get out from under that. But part of the problem that we have in the have and the have-nots, and your whole question about how do we help those people who missed the recovery of the Great Recession, which many people have missed it, okay? We here in this valley, we got a later start than our coastal communities because we're now really starting to see a lot of development. But many areas of our country had no economic recovery, okay? And I think that's fundamentally why we have the man in the White House that we have right now. Because he said, I can fix all your problems. When in reality, the federal government needed to look across all of the areas that got so decimated during the recession and find ways, and it was their representatives at the federal level to work with the local government to bring back the economy in those areas through grants, through work, federal grants, through different CBDG grants. There's all kinds of money that could have been used to help some of these folks, these economies that never recovered. And I know I've been in many of them. So I think we have to push for policies that allow people to have the economy in their local area has to be lifted up, and whatever resources the federal government can offer, we have to galvanize those. And we have to realize that our metropolitan areas, our coastal communities, and our bigger cities, they are now, looked upon as, the evil ones. And you have to take into account that we have our own jobs to do, right? We have to rebuild these areas that have had no economic recovery at all, and that's going to take a state, local, and federal policy. Yeah, absolutely. We completely missed that part. I think everybody hunkered down in their little area, and they kind of just said, I can see the light at the end of the day. But when you look across the entire swath, it didn't happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Liam, I'm a concerned voter. How do you respond to me?
All right, so I'm first going to ask: Are there any billionaires here? Anybody here? Okay.
Gosh.
Okay, so
How embarrassing.
assuming there are no billionaires here, my first argument would be that our problem is not with the income taxes. Our problem is the wages. All right, our problem is the stagnation in wages and the low incomes that Americans have been getting for some time. We are at this point working much harder for less than at any point. And with all the increases in productivity, that makes no actual economic sense. It defies all basic capitalist logics here. So let's start with the fact that our living standards have been in decline for 40 years now. The richest country in the history of the world ranks 16th in living standards. This offends me, right? And this is a matter of actual policy. All right. Now, people argued initially for these policy changes in the 70s and 80s, arguing for the whole trickle-down logic that this will, if you give tax cuts to the job creators, that they will invest that money in their businesses and the economy will grow and people's wages will rise. That is literally the exact opposite of what always happens, and we have known this for a long time. Harding and Coolidge passed tax cuts on the rich, and it did exactly the same kind of thing that Reagan's tax cuts did. In the long run, they always do damage. I would start then by making, especially to the right-wing voter there, I would make a capitalist argument for a progressive tax and try to show the way that it works here. If you think back for a second here, we had very rich people in the 50s and 60s, right? There were still rich people, right? We weren't living in some there were still rich people. Now, the average pay then for CEOs back then was somewhere around 20 times their average workers, which is a significant amount of money, right? Today it's between 300 and 400 times. A progressive tax on high incomes, especially like marginal tax rates on high incomes there, remove the business incentive to give massive compensation packages at the top, right? Which means the company has money and it needs to spend it somewhere else. Why just spend it if it's just going to be taxed away? So they reinvest in their business and grow their business, and they give their workers a higher wage. This is why we had the longest sustained economic boom in our history in the 50s and 60s, and why poverty was declining. When we reversed course then, all right, and took the taxes off the rich, it flipped the business logic, and they started, instead of using high wages for ordinary workers to recruit the best workers, they started giving massive compensation packages at the top, which basically, if you give a tax cut to a rich person, they cannot spend that money in the real economy anyway. It's literally taking money out of the economy, which does hurt us. All right, it depresses wages. Wages have been stagnant since the 1970s, and in some sectors of the U.S. economy have actually fallen. All right, so I'd start there. The other thing I'd point to, especially if you're talking about economic fears, and from a conservative side here too, people are often afraid of like trade, competition with China, right? China, or fears of immigration. The immigrants are taking our jobs, right? And so you've got these two big fears. They're not. Trade doesn't take your jobs. Immigration doesn't take your jobs. Automation has been taking your jobs, and it has been doing so steadily for more than 2 centuries, right? This is always going to be the case, right? The new innovations increase productivity and reduce the need for manual labor, right? And this used to be a good thing because, people could be, retrained for new fields, and it's not like we're all like trying to, we're lamenting the horse and buggy business, what about the poor farriers who can't take care of it? I mean, it's gone. People found other jobs and things changed, right? Automation does improve things. The problem here is we we're in the third industrial revolution here, and we have seen already millions of jobs disappear in this country, and 47% of those that remain are at risk in the next few decades, and not just in manufacturing where it's mostly been concentrated up to this point. You guys have all noticed those self-checkout lines, ATMs everywhere, you know. Service sector jobs are going to disappear. White-collar jobs are going to disappear. I have friends who work in artificial intelligence trying to actually replace office workers, right? Tons of jobs are going to disappear here. This could be a boon to Americans here. It could allow us to work shorter hours for more pay. But that again requires changes in the way the tax code works. We need to start not only taxing the top earners, but finding a way to tax the robots, right? And letting that drive things, because they're the ones actually producing the value at this point, and they're going to continue to produce more and more and a greater share of that value, right? So, you know, putting the burden where it actually belongs there instead of leaving people slipping farther and farther into debt and misery, which that makes no sense to me at all.
Okay, thank you. Again, if you have a question on that issue, feel free to ask them. I'm going to move on to the fourth and final hot issue from field represented data, which is guns. So I am a concerned citizen, Liam. I'm either very, very concerned because I'm afraid that you're going to use school shootings as an excuse to take my guns away, and I think I have the right to have my guns. I think I have the right to have whatever gun I want. And I think I have a lot of evidence that if you take away my guns, the bad guys will still have theirs, and you're just taking away my self-protection, right? Or I am a very concerned citizen because my child knows how to do a school shooting lockdown. And I don't think that people should have the number of guns that they have, and I certainly don't think that they should have high-capacity weapons of death that they can buy at any time and go and potentially go into my child's school. What is your response to concerned voters on guns?
Okay, so first off, this is one of those great places where there is potential to actually bring people together and have productive conversations on this, because this topic tends to excite passions, and it tends to end up people taking extremely ideological positions that cannot communicate in any way with each other, right? So I want to try and find ways around that. We have to start off with a basic acknowledgement. This is an epidemic of gun violence. It is unusual by developed world standards. In fact, we have violence levels comparable to the developing world, right? No other rich country in the world has this kind of problem. It is an epidemic, and it needs to be studied as one. So we have to at least acknowledge that part. Now, the fact that it's been increasing so much too, and you know, I think that I can make at least a quick personal point here. I mean, I grew up when this is just starting to be more of an issue here. I grew up with like drive-by shootings happening around here. I grew up in South LA, right? And we used to talk about like the gangs and whatnot. Oh yeah, there was a shooting back here. The Crips were at it again, you know, like last week, you know, and that was bad enough. It's nothing at all as bad as things have been in the post-Columbine generations here. So I would propose two basic policies here to address the issue as it stands. The first is universal background checks, right? More than 90% of all gun-owning families do support universal background checks, so somehow we still have to fight through the corruption in Congress to get this through, right? If we can, there are states in this country where I can buy a weapon without ever showing any ID. Right? Just literally buy it out of the trunk of someone's car. Private sales need to be counted, right? Which is one way of helping to clamp down on the criminal elements there, right? Close the private sale and the gun show loopholes there. The other I would propose is a more systemic reform. I would propose a training and certification regime. So you want access to a particular type of firearm, you take a training course for that firearm, you learn how to store properly that weapon, you pass a test that shows you know how to use and store that weapon, and you get certified on that every few years. So we know exactly who has them and how they know how to use them. This way, of course, if a toddler picks up a gun you left on the nightstand and kills their sibling, you can obviously be prosecuted for negligence there, because that's literally your fault and we know you knew better. Right? So actually knowing that there's some level of training, I think, and put a lot of minds at ease, right, based on the kinds of people that might have the weapons. The other thing I would point to in addressing these kind of questions here, and I think this helps too, if we could cut through a little bit of the noise on this, because this is such a big wedge issue in this country, is to note that the levels of gun violence in this country reflect much deeper systemic issues, right? If you look at, yes, there are countries in the developed world that have higher rates of gun ownership than the United States does, and yet no mass shootings. Go figure. What do they have? Good training systems, good background checks, you know, and they also have a better socioeconomic situation. right? The lack of health care here, right? Puts people in a lot of trouble there. Stress over medical bills. We're the only country in the world with medical bankruptcies, right? Obviously, mental health care, right? This is not to say all shootings are because of mental health issues, but some are. And it's worth noting that the vast majority of gun deaths are because of suicides, right? Better mental health provision for people could dramatically lower that number, right? Which would help in the total. Also, the declining living standards as a whole. Think of the basic economic insecurity someone might have. They're worried about losing their job. They're perpetually stressed out. So then it's connected to tons of other areas. Drug use, alcoholism, right? People are stressed because things are harder than they should be in a country this rich. If you can address those issues, right? And I would say you have to address those issues too in order really to make progress on the gun issue.
Great, thank you. Regina, I'm a concerned voter. How do you respond to my concerns?
So I'm responding to the one that
You
don't want.
can respond
Yeah, you don't want.
to whomever you would like.
Yeah, yeah. So, first of all, I think, I'm not against the Second Amendment, obviously. The Second Amendment is part of our Constitution, and guns are a part of this country. I'm not a big gun fan myself, but that's my personal preference. But I am strongly opposed to having automatic weapons of any sort. I don't think people need automatic or semi-automatic weapons. They are not for shooting deer or turkey or anything else. I grew up in a hunting family, and we did not need those to bring home any kind of food. So that is first and foremost. Background checks, the fact that we are still struggling with universal background checks is almost appalling. And it's such an easy thing to do. I mean, like the president of New Zealand said, what is wrong with you people after their massacre in New Zealand a few months ago, or weeks. It feels like it's always happening every day. So we have to close those loopholes. The fact that you can buy, as Liam said, a gun out of the back of someone's trunk, the fact that you can go to a gun show, and I know people who do this a lot and buy weapons with no background check is not acceptable. So the lobbyists, once again, the NRA and Smith & Wesson and whomever else is not wanting these things to change, they have to be, we have to bring them to accountability, and we simply have to start doing the background checks, the universal background checks. The other thing that I think is really important, and Liam, you spoke about it, is the role that mental illness plays in all of this. You know, we have a law here in California that was passed called Laura's Law, and that allows family members, physicians, people who start seeing a behavior for someone that has a mental problem, or they're just suspecting that they do, that they can go and say, I need them to have their guns removed. This is a no-brainer, okay? If we can do this in the most populated state in the nation, this should be immediately put into our federal regulations, because we all know people who, as Liam was saying, have stresses in their lives, and if they're not able to cope, if they lose their job, or they have a divorce, or they just simply have a mental illness, schizophrenia, or paranoid delusions, they cannot be allowed to keep their guns. So many of the shootings that have happened in our country over the last 20 years, there were plenty of signs. The Columbine parents saw lots of reasons for their children not to have access to weapons. Sandy Hook. So to act like we don't know, it needs to be the same thing that we hear about terrorism, see something, say something. That needs to be a universal message to our country. We have to start taking responsibility, and a law like Laura's Law needs to be instituted. And finally, the weapons ban, we need to reinstate the 1994 assault weapons ban, and that's just it, period. I think you can trace statistically the huge increase in those kinds of shootings from 2004 until now. So that's like no brainer.
Okay, thank you so much. So can we give them a round of applause for so graciously responding to my pretend voter concerns. concerns, but they're very real voter concerns, right? I like that the candidates pointed out at certain points that some things people say might not necessarily be accurate, but the fact of the matter is, if the voter believes it, then that's something that you need to be able to navigate, and it's something you need to be able to talk to them to convince them, right? So again, we are not going to get rid of Ken Calvert without convincing a large chunk of people who generally vote conservative to vote for a new candidate. Even if you look at the registration numbers alone, Republicans out-register Democrats by more than 30,000 votes. And then we also have about 100,000 independents who generally skew conservative. So any candidate that we put up against Ken Calvert is going to have to be able to sway people whose views are generally conservative. So that's why I was playing like I was a conservative person at some time, because that's really important for us to keep in mind. So I'm going to open it up to 30 minutes of audience Q&A. I have no interest in censoring you or your questions. I want you to ask whatever you'd like. I do request, however, that you remain respectful to the candidates who are here offering their time. And I also request that you keep questions in the purview of the job they are applying for, right? So these people are asking us as active citizens to represent us in the United States House of Representatives. So asking them a question about the I-15 getting shut down this weekend, right, is not in the purview of the job, right? So this is a federal position. We should be asking them questions about federal issues. Not to say that the congressperson has nothing to do with local issues, but it's just really not the purview, right? I encourage you to push your city council people, your state senator, your assembly person on local issues. So please, my two requests: stay respectful, keep your questions within the purview of the position, and then I'm also going to ask you to be clear who you're asking. You might be asking a question you want both candidates to answer, or you might just specifically be addressing one person, which is either way is fine. And then I would love if you introduce yourself. You don't have to, but when you stand up, if you can say your name and that you have a question, I would appreciate it. So go ahead, hi.
Hi.
And then the candidates, you can sit, stand, don't care.
My name is Paul Metz. I'm a member of Temecula Valley Democrats and also one of the precinct captains in Temecula. I have been searching for, and this question is for both of them, so I'll just ask you to go first. I've been looking for that elusive Democrat who supports open borders. I don't know what that term means, but are you that candidate that supports open borders?
Okay, so that's an extremely difficult question in terms of the messaging, in part because people often do not understand what it means in any real way.
I do not know what it means, it's
Right,
just that
and
we're labeled
because
that.
it can mean
Yes.
something different to different people, right? Because it's simply a fact of human history that for most of our history, borders were not policed at all. People just moved wherever, right? And that comes up to even very recently. I mean, most of my answers just like arrived in the country and got off the ships, and at some point they just like said, hey, I think I want to register to vote. I kind of like this country. This is cool, right? That was quite recent that we started doing that. We tend to forget just how recently a lot of those reforms came into place, right? Open borders have been the norm for most of human history. The fact is, though, that situations have changed around the world, and people do tend to want some control over, at least knowledge of who is in the different countries, right? Because it affects all kinds of things. Governments now do much more for us than they ever did before, right? 200 years ago, you did not want the government to know who you were because it meant that they wanted to draft your sons and tax you. That was literally all governments ever did to you, right? Here, governments actually provide services, right? Now, I would argue that it really depends on where you want to stand here. For someone who's going to take a hard capitalist sort of position, then actually free movement of labor makes a great deal of sense, right? And actually, it builds along that system anyway. So it really depends on where they want to go with that, but it doesn't mean that you want that. If you're instead wanting to build more of a social democratic system, then having some idea who in the country makes better sense as well too. But again, aggressive policing also is counterproductive, right? It ends up wasting money, not really solving something. From my perspective, I do like the idea of movement of peoples, but it's difficult unless you have really strong economies with all of your neighbors. For example, the Schengen area in Europe works really well. If anybody doesn't know what that means there's a whole bunch of countries in Western Europe here where you do not need a passport or anything to pass from one country to the next. You can live in the other country, it's fine, no one really cares. You're all just members of the same supranational club. All right? And that works actually well for them because all those countries are relatively rich. We have a lot poorer countries to our southern border, all right, which does increase problems of crime, of trafficking. People in this country still want drugs, so that's going to come in somehow here. So some kind of knowledge of how that works makes sense. I don't think completely opening that border is feasible given the economic differences, right? But that's my main objection here is really the economic disparity, right? I don't think, for example, it'd be a problem with Canada because Canada has a higher actually Canada, the standard of living in Canada is higher than it is here, right? So we wouldn't run into the same basic problem, same issues with movement across that border there. Right? Does that help a little bit there?
I was hoping for a yes or a no.
Because it depends on what you mean. Yeah,
I don't know what it
yeah,
means.
it depends on what it means to you, you know? I would say, for the way most people mean it, probably no, because of the way because of the situations too are south, right? But I like it as an ideal because it does actually foster economic growth. It helps. We're gonna have massive waves of climate refugees. Regina brought that up here. That's only going to increase over the next century here. We're gonna have to find some ways to deal with that, right? And so there's a whole lot of issues in terms of migration we need to deal with in the long run, but right now the socioeconomic distinctions there make it difficult to have it completely open. So I would
Right,
say
so
no.
you're not proposing that we
I'm not.
remove all
I'm not at all. Not
supervision on the border
Not at all.
altogether? Okay.
No. I'm not in favor of things like the walls or like the kind of aggressive policing there because it's generally ineffective anyway, and it's oftentimes counterproductive. It traps more people in the country, right? But I'm not in favor of free movement of peoples as you have in Western Europe because I don't think it fits the situation in the Americas the same way it does there.
Great, thank you. Regina?
No.
Because Paul, it was for both candidates, right?
It was.
Okay.
I was hoping you'd say that.
No. And I'll go back to what I said earlier about we have a humanitarian crisis south of the border in Central America. I mean, if we really cared about this, if we were really trying to be the humanitarian people that we always thought we were, which I think is pretty much sailed in a different direction, we would actually be working with Guatemala, El Salvador, all of those people to find out what they need to do to stay there successfully, okay? And we would also be helping to make sure that if they can provide labor from a capitalistic standpoint, that we're bringing them through the system properly so that we can get houses built, roads built, all the things that we need to have done that we don't have the labor for. But it has to be a joint effort, right? I think we're way late to the party to sit down with our Central American counterparts and say, what is going on over here and how can this richest country in the world help you solve your problems? That needed to happen like 20 years ago, because this didn't just happen, guys. They have been having ravages of famine for the last 20 years. When your ground won't bear food, what are you going to do? You have to go somewhere. So no, we're not gonna open the borders, but I think we're smart enough to figure out how to collaborate and work with other countries to meet our needs and their needs, and in the long run, find solutions. And so here you go.
Thank you. Hi, go.
My name is Francisco Solano, the Latino Project in Riverside. If I come here, we have 29 people. 12 of these people are Latino. Latino is the only vote that is growing because of the demographic changes. What will you campaign do to attract the Latino vote? Thank you. One minute each.
That's fair. I can actually set a timer so more people have a chance to ask questions. Are you asking of both candidates?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, Regina, why don't you take
The
that first?
first thing I'm going to do is translate my website when it's up, because I think that's only fair and right to have my website translated in Spanish. I mean, I would be offended if I spoke another language and someone was trying to get me to vote for them, and because a lot of people are more comfortable in speaking Spanish. I do not speak Spanish. Unfortunately, I was raised in the South, and we were not even given that in high school. So that would be the first thing that I would do. And then I would also try to learn more about, from a cultural perspective, what it is that matters to them. And that's why I have the five survey questions on my website. And as soon as my translator gets done with the translation job, I would be translating my website and get more out into the community. I am not that familiar with the Riverside area as far as the Latina culture there and the places to go, but I absolutely am committed to doing that for sure. So
6 seconds to spare.
I don't know.
You forfeit. Okay, Liam.
All right, I'll start with the same thing. The reason that my current website wasn't translated into Spanish yet is that I have a friend that's currently with his company redesigning a new one that's going to replace it, and that one will have an option. Then it will have a multilingual website from the go. So I want people to be able to read the stuff comfortably in their own language, especially since when you're talking about policy matters, it can be quite technical. The other would be to address concerns the community actually has, which often in this area, especially in the inland counties here, they're basically socioeconomic in nature, right? The people often are struggling to make ends meet in working class communities, and people who are Spanish speakers primarily have an even harder time actually getting around that or getting outside of their own tight-knit community there. Not to mention, if you get back to the whole issues with Calvert and his history of playing kind of fast and loose with the kind of xenophobic policies on this sort of thing, highlighting that history and that we need to actually deal with the immigration problem.
Nice. Okay. Next question. Yes.
My name's Tiffany. I'm from Corona. My question is for both the candidates. What's your stance on deportation for low-level criminal offenses like, say, possession or shoplifting?
Yeah, let's bump up. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so first off, I have serious reservations about the whole deportation proceedings to begin with, unless there is some kind of significant criminal issue there and the person had not already put down roots in the U.S. Because if they have, then they should be prosecuted through our system and go to jail here. Possession is a good one there. I think we need to deal with the drug issue, period. I don't think that anyone should be being busted for whatever they're doing in their own home. That's not my business, right? Low-level things like shoplifting, why is that worth tearing families apart? Kicking out breadwinners, like breaking up homes. It makes no sense at all to me. So I would absolutely and adamantly oppose the idea of deportations for low-level criminal offenses.
Well, Liam, you said it really well. So I feel very strongly that deportation for anything like that is not acceptable. And I would advocate for policies that unless someone has done something that is truly a crime beyond, I wouldn't get, we're not going to get into serious trouble for shoplifting. So the crime of crime does not equal something like breaking up a family or anything like that. That whole thing is just not acceptable at all. So that's the short and long answer for me.
How do you feel about compulsory service for people who do not go into the military, such as working in the inner city, working as a volunteer in some type of a hospital or other public facility, some type of compulsory public service?
It's for both?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, compulsory, that's pretty strong.
In lieu of military service.
Okay.
I'm saying one or the other.
I haven't really given that as much thought as I probably should have, but I think off the top of my head, I think I would be for that actually, because I think part of, and you alluded to it, Christine, part of what's happened in our country is we are no longer active citizens. So we've lost that whole part of us that said we are responsible for ourselves, our brother, our sister, our entire country. I think that would be really helpful for people to realize that they do have the responsibility for taking a stance in this country and serving in this country, which I think we've all gotten away from, to be honest with you. I think that would be very helpful.
All right, I'll start off by saying that I I kind of like the idea, the way it often plays out in some places. There are plenty of countries in the world that do have a kind of compulsory service. It can build a stronger bond within a particular nation there. That said, it tends to work much better on very small countries, right, that can much more easily foster those kind of connections there. Compulsory service in very large countries like Russia, for example, is generally disastrous. It's because it's difficult to build those kind of bonds that way. The biggest problem that I have with a program like that in the United States is simply our history and the national character, which does tend to focus a lot more on the small L kind of libertarian values, the sort of like individual liberties. While I like the idea of contributing national service, the idea of forcing people to do it, I think flies in the face of what this country was founded on. I would instead like to encourage something. So go back to something like Kennedy's sort of like Peace Corps kind of idea, encourage some kind of national service and suggest it, but not force it.
Okay, thank you. Yes, hi.
Yes, my name is Martha and I'm Latina Association President and founder here in the area. And I also ran for City Council in Temecula last year. And my question is generalized because this is in depth. Being the just and during the 40s and 50s, our economy boomed in California and throughout the nation because of the guest worker program. It was very well done. What would you do if, when you take office, to implement that program, specifically in agricultural and rural areas? We are still pretty rural, pretty agricultural.
So we're thinking here back to like the Bracero program.
Exactly.
Okay, so the key for me in any kind of guest worker program is to prevent abuses, right? And the program did have a number of places where there were places where it could be abused. I would want to make sure that employers absolutely could not take advantage of guest workers in any way, shape, or form. They had to be treated as if they were legal, permanent residents of the United States with all the rights thereof, right? If that's done, I would actually be comfortable introducing legislation for a guest worker program as part of trying to deal with the immigration problem as a whole, right? Because it does contribute in a lot of ways here, and I would actually message this, again, especially for an area like this, in more conservative economic terms, that this actually does make sense. It will grow the economy out here. It will end up helping everyone out in that sense, right? And focus on that aspect of it.
So actually what you're describing is pretty much what I was saying earlier about how we need to do a better job of working with the Central American countries that are struggling right now. A good, very well developed, designed, and administered guest worker program would actually be a source of labor that we're in desperate need for. I mean, especially in our region where the housing market is expanding dramatically and building is happening all around us. If we want to keep affordable housing in this area, we are going to have workers, and there's no two ways about it. If we don't, then we're going to end up spiking and peaking in our housing prices, and we'll have another downturn. So I absolutely would support any kind of policy that would implement a well-designed guest worker program that could not be abused.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Hello.
Hi, my name is Murrieta and I'm involved with the Phil Team 6 voter registration group. And my question is regarding Citizens United. I would like to ask both of you what you feel about it. What would you do once you become elected?
Okay. Citizens United.
Oh, I don't like it.
Why?
Because it's a complete and total obliteration of how our country was created and founded, and I'm appalled by it, and I believe that it needs to be, the simple fact that our Supreme Court supported it is just mind-blowing to me. And so from a policy perspective, it needs to be completely dialed back. It is the reason that Ken Calvert is who he is, okay? It is the reason that we have the corruption in our system right now. And it will continue. And if we don't, if it's not repealed, if it's not removed, then we can pretty much all forget about, it's not gonna be the United States of America, it's gonna be the United States of corporate America. And so I am not a fan, and I am appalled that it is continued, and I am appalled that people like Ken have never spoken up against it. So What would I do with
Sorry,
it?
she's out of time. Maybe
tell you. No.
maybe somebody else will steal a similar question and you can get more out of her.
Okay, so I'll start by pointing out that corruption is not new in this country at all, and at least since 1898, the wealthy have been buying election after election. So there's nothing new about that. Citizens United takes it to a whole new level, right? So this has been building up incrementally for a long time, getting more and more corrupt. And at this point, most of the people in government are deeply implicated in this. I often joke that they should be wearing like NASCAR jackets with patches for all the people who basically own them because it's not us, all right?
Correct.
My approach here would be to try to wipe the slate clean. Honestly, I think nearly everyone in Congress needs to go. And it's not just Ken Calvert for me, it's everybody who's tied into this basic corrupt money system. To actually get it through, it does require a constitutional amendment, unfortunately, but it has broad bipartisan support. Republicans and Democrats consistently say corruption in Washington is a big deal. It played into Trump's rhetoric. Of course, Trump himself is deeply corrupt, but Drain the Swamp was about the corruption in Washington. We can mobilize voters on both sides to stand behind an amendment that could pass in both chambers and be ratified in this country here to ban lobbying entirely and keep the dirty money out of politics.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, hello.
Hey. Okay, so my name is Alan Suarez. I am 21 years old and I'm president and founder of the Temecula Valley Young Democrats. So my question for you comes from us millennials and Gen Zers. I think that our biggest problem for the young generation is going to be our environment. So we have many scientists saying that if we don't make a change the next 15, 20 years, we will not have a chance to make a change. So my question for you is, what will you do in the next 2, 5, and 10 years to push for aggressive policies, and what will you push for?
Good question.
All right, again, we have to deal with the basic electoral fabric out here. I would again have to start pushing ideas. If you're going to, we've discussed the range of things we have to do. If you want to use the umbrella term of Green New Deal, right? That's fine. We need to take apart the basic ideas and message them in a way that makes sense to independents and moderate conservatives out here, in a way that actually helps them. If we can show them that massive investment in certain areas to change the energy infrastructure will create better paying jobs and boost the economy as a whole, right? We can show them ways that it actually directly helps them. Right? But I would push aggressively on these kind of issues, right? Because it's difficult to do, especially when people are denying the basic scientific consensus. Oh no, that's not true, it's fake news here. I think some of the ways to avoid that, instead of getting head on and saying, no, you're wrong, dude, the scientists are right about this, is to kind of go around it and talk about the benefits of the programs you would use to actually address it, and show them that these programs will directly help your life here and now, and then we get the benefit of knowing that they'll also, like, I don't know, avoid human extinction.
Regina.
So, I've spent the last 10 years of my career and my life working on sustainability issues here in California. So the answer for me is really simple. We are doing it right. Okay, our state has built a model for the country to follow. And at the end of the day, we have created jobs. Solar jobs are fast growing. I mean, they have come down somewhat because of the tariffs, but they're coming back up again on the tariffs on the solar panels. So California is a model of everything that this country needs to be doing. We're going to meet our 1990 emission standards. We're going to meet our 2020 goals to be residential, to be net zero. We're going to meet our 2030 commercial building goals. We are doing it right, folks, and I'm in the trenches every day. And the short answer is we simply have to take our policies that we have created and take them to Washington, because we are a litmus test. I mean, our governor went to France and talked in replace of our president for the Paris climate talks. And at the end of the day, we are living through what works. We haven't lost any jobs. We've increased our jobs due to our sustainable platforms. Our utility companies are now embracing sustainable energy production. So this is it right here. We've got the plan. Okay, that's it.
I think we have time for one, maybe two more. Go ahead, you're in. Yes.
Everything is well and good. How will you get your message out to the voters without money?
Right, so is that just to me or to both of us?
Sign turning?
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know. Oh, is it?
Yeah, you're first.
Oh, I thought you were first.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as a marketing professional, this is pretty much what I do for a living. I've been doing marketing for 33 years. So for me, this is probably the easiest part. I understand how to do things cost effectively. I do all my own copywriting, all my own art direction, all my own social media development, and probably I'm a unique candidate in that I could probably help the other candidates to show them how to get things done most cost effectively. People think things cost a lot of money in the marketing and messaging arena, but they really don't. You just have to know how to get things done. So I think I bring a really unique perspective to that because I have the resources to get things done very cost effectively.
Okay. Lee?
All right, so the first thing I would acknowledge is that it will take more money than people have been able to raise out here for quite some time in order to unseat Calvert. That said, I don't think that a lot of the analysts saying that we would need $2 or $3 million to do it and have to outspend Calvert is actually right either, because we don't have to do the same things that he did. In fact, Bill Hedrick got very, very close to him in 2008 with only $250,000, and the number of Republicans in his district was considerably higher than the number there is currently in this district, 42. The numbers have changed over time in a way that's sort of favorable. I would focus on trying to get messages out in various ways, like video development, especially trying to target younger voters here with snappy production there, a good social media campaign, and then tons of volunteers on the ground trying to move out there, tons of public events, doing public appearances, maybe sort of fun things, come on, meet the candidates and actually interact with people. I will go anywhere. I'll hang out in the Moose Lodge, the Chamber of Commerce, anywhere in order to talk to people. If we're there for them and able to talk to them, and we can actually present the message in various media, I think we can actually sway this with much less than you might think.
Okay, if there's a burning one. All right, last question. Last question, go ahead.
Okay, when we send you there, you have a dual duty, national but local. When we send you there, based upon the knowledge that you have on our region, what can you do? What can you bring into our region? A question for both of you.
I think the key thing to note is that a lot of the things that I would pursue nationally directly affect the region out here, because I'm talking about actually trying to raise our wages and our basic standard of living. One of the biggest things you have to think about, a local problem a lot of people complain about, like the traffic that comes in and out of this area here. The traffic is because there's not a lot of local economic development, right? People come out here because the housing's a little cheaper, and then they have to drive out to work, right? So you pursue policies that would actually increase economic growth in these inland areas, so people don't have to do that. Why keep widening the freeways forever if the jobs are going to stay out there, right? We have to do something to stimulate local economic growth here. So I would look for opportunities there and ways in which you can kind of push those sort of development.
So I basically would start from the ground level. There's a lot of things that we need to do here from an infrastructure standpoint. We need to look at our water resources. We have to look across all of the jurisdictions to make sure that we're all being represented fairly. So I think it's very important to know the landscape, because there's pockets of money in different organizations like SCAG and WRCOG, and there's just lots of different NGOs and different organizations that get federal funding, right? So you have to know who's getting the money and how it's being used. So you have to familiarize yourself with all the different players. And then I think you also have to, as Liam said, you have to look at the economy and how we're going out instead of coming in. That means that if there's grants and things that are available for workforce training, if there's an opportunity for some kind of federal funding to bring in a university to develop different kinds of labor, we have to work with our local government, and we have to know who we can work with locally so that we can bring that funding, because we might find the funding, but it has to be implemented on the ground. So you have to know those different ways of channeling that money to the right places. So that's how I would approach it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for your questions. I'm actually going to let them have the last word. I told them to prepare a few closing remarks, and then we'll wrap up. I know we're running a little over, and I want to be respectful of your time. Since Regina went first during our conversation, would you like to do your closing remarks first?
Sure. Okay, so I wanted to keep this sort of informal, given the sort of circumstances for this. One thing that I would do in sort of closing, if I'm going to make a pitch to you, why should you bother supporting me? Why not one of our other fine candidates? Why would you get behind this sort of campaign? There are a lot of things that I can try to bring to the table here, right? I've spent a lot of time studying the region and what kind of paths you might be able to take in order to actually flip a district like this, focus on different ways to message policies to reach a broader range of voters. I think a lot of people in this country misunderstand how to flip areas that are already somewhat conservative. They think that the Democrat needs to chase after the Republican, right, and be more like them. Well, if you're Republican light and there's a Republican, why bother voting for Republican light, right? And if you're already conceding on your issues right at the beginning, what's the point? The trick is instead to take your progressive views and message them in a way that actually makes sense to people, right? Puts it into their own particular lived context, right? And we stay in our own little bubbles, our own little echo chambers, and we only talk to people who already agree with us, and then that kind of affects the way we talk about these issues. But there actually would be a lot more agreement on basic issues if we can actually cut through the noise and talk about them in a way that makes more sense to people. That's something that I would want to try and bring into this. I mean, I am by training a historian of ideas. I study how people have pitched things, right, at different times, right? And that would make a certain amount of sense to me, at least in these inland districts. I personally think that all of the remaining inland districts should be in play, right? They are essentially already purple districts, right? And the fact that they're not tells me that we're not hitting the right messages that make sense to the voters. We're not actually appealing to them in a way that makes sense. The other thing that I'd like to try and do too is raise the profile of these districts, because we tend to pay attention to the big cities in this country, right? And we tend not to pay attention to a lot of the more peripheral areas. So I'd like to let the country know the 42nd actually matters, and so does the 50th, and so does the 8th, so let's be fair there, right? But these districts actually do matter to this country as a whole, and we should be actually focusing some resources on this, right? To develop these areas, right? To build them, to let them realize their potential, right? And that means getting out our message not only locally to different people, but also nationally, right? That's something that I would really want to try and bring into the campaign, right?
Thank you. Richie?
Well, as a professional communicator, I have been looking across a variety of regions for all of my career. So what I bring to this race is I understand demographics. I understand why people move certain places. I understand how they live, their lifestyle needs. I understand what they're looking for when they move to a particular area. What I don't understand is why anybody would continue voting for Ken Calvert in a district that's so growing and in such need for attention. And California 42 does matter. It matters to the state. It matters to the nation. We are probably now number 2 or number 3 in logistics in this country. So whatever happens on our roadways, whatever happens in our warehouses, all of these things matter. They matter to California and they matter to the country. I approach every single client, every single situation with my mantra, which is listen, learn, and act. And I think we have not been listened to in this district for 20 some odd years. So I am interested in what you think. I want to know what you want out of a congressional candidate, and I want to put that into action. The other thing that I bring to the table is, as a pragmatist, as a professional business person and marketing person, I have had to learn a variety of industries, and I have to learn them quick. I have to learn as much as I possibly can about healthcare, insurance, sustainability, energy, utilities, high tech. I have to know these things like better than the owner, because I'm advising them on how to communicate and message their product and their service to their customer. So I'm going to bring that ability to learn quickly and message out to people in a way that will get their attention, that will engage them, that will empower them, that will educate and motivate them to take the next step. I actually think, because of my pragmatic background and my business background, that I will be able to bring people from the Republican side, because I do understand their concerns. I do understand where they're coming from. Not everything is always black and white. You have to negotiate. You have to come in to a situation and bring solutions. And sometimes you don't win. Sometimes you have to compromise. So, my experience in overseeing a huge campaign for the state of California, $56 million budget, 26 different stakeholders, 50 organizations. I have the ability to multitask and to understand where everybody's coming from. There are many diverse opinions and many diverse attitudes and outcomes that people want. And that is one of my strengths. And I believe that I will be able to bring that to this race, and I'll be able to take on Ken's mantra of I don't care, because I do care and we matter, and California 42 matters. Thank you.
Can we give them all a round? It means so much to me that you guys came. This is my little baby project. It's only like 8 months old, and I love that you're here and that you are an active citizen. Please fill out the survey. I want to know your opinion. I welcome your feedback. It's easy to remember. It's just tinyurl.com/feelrepresentedforum. So if you can fill it out tonight, great. If not, hopefully you'll remember that URL. You can stick around and mingle. Richie's closes at 9, so they request that we leave before 9.